Tonight on Primetime Politics, Arctic defense.
We are like-minded. We hold basic values constantly dear.
The Prime Minister lands in Norway, joining his Norwegian and German counterparts as the three countries take in joint war games amid increased investments into their respective and mutual defense. But is Canada moving at a speed to meet the expectations of the country's allies? We will examine the issue. Also, the Prime Minister's trip to Norway follows a multi-billion-dollar announcement made in Yellowknife yesterday, creating an economic and security corridor in the Canadian North. Coming up, we'll speak to RJ Simpson, the Premier of the Northwest Territories, about those investments and what they will mean for the people he represents. Plus, the Ottawa Bureau Chiefs on the week in Parliament. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. Well, the Prime Minister is in Norway this evening, there to take in a joint military exercise above the Arctic Circle, and then later this weekend to take part in a summit with Nordic leaders. But ahead of both those events, the Prime Minister also had the chance to meet with his Norwegian and German counterparts today, and also had discussions, most probably included talk about a potential submarine contract, most definitely included talk about defense cooperation among middle powers.
We're all investing heavily in our defense and security, and we all recognize that we are much stronger together. Stronger together when we cooperate in areas such as space, cooperate in defense, but also cooperate with other like-minded nations, and there's no better illustration than Operation Cold Response.
The Prime Minister from earlier today in Norway. Well, to talk about this trip, we're now joined by Wendy Gilmour. From 2022 to 24, Ms. Gilmour was seconded to NATO, where she served as Assistant Secretary General for Defense Investment. She has a distinguished record as a Canadian diplomat and these days sits on the board of directors for the Conference of Defense Associations Institute, upon which she serves as Vice Chair. Ms. Gilmour, thank you for being with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So here we have the Prime Minister this evening in Norway, and that's where I want to begin our discussion, because I'm hoping you can put this visit into some context for us, because obviously it comes, yes, to watch NATO exercises, but it also takes place as the Prime Minister meets with allies and talks about middle powers needing to step up in this moment of global history. I
mean, the most important thing about his visit right at the moment is that it is a demonstration that Canada remains firmly committed to NATO and to working with our Nordic partners in particular. I think it's part of a constant refrain by Prime Minister Carney and his government that they want to work more closely with Europe in defence cooperation. We saw the conclusion of a Canada-EU defence cooperation agreement. We are part of the SAFE agreement, which is rebuilding and European defence capabilities, and at the same time we're making significant investments into our own. So that's it's important for Canada to be visible and to be present, to remind European partners that we are still there.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that, because you talk about defense cooperation and investments, and certainly this trip comes just weeks after the Prime Minister unveiled this country's new defense industrial policy. It comes as, he looks to Northern Defense, making the announcements as he did yesterday in Yellowknife. Mm-hmm. And really there's two things out of that I want to talk about. The first has to do with tone, because reputationally, Canada is known for stepping up with things like Ukraine and taking part in international missions when called upon, but at the same time does not have the best track record when it comes to military procurement, domestic investment into defense in this country. Now that the language around it has changed in this last year, what has been the response to that from our allies?
It's not just the language that's changed, it's dollars against real commitments. And I think that's what our allies are looking for. They have seen Canada be one of the slowest to implement plans to get to the 2% of GDP that NATO countries agreed in 2014. The fact that the Prime Minister announced in June that we would get to 2% in year, and with every likelihood that is happening, and we see the expenditures happening right now, into the the baseline capabilities, getting the forces back to where they should be. And then at the same time, we had last summer the announcement by the Prime Minister that Canada would join other NATO nations in moving to 5% of GDP, which is 3.5% of hard military capabilities and 1.5% of dual-use infrastructure, which is what we saw yesterday up in the north. So I think it's really important that the Prime Minister has gone to Norway now, immediately following a visit to Yellowknife. Yes, I think our Yukon colleagues are not so happy that they weren't part of this announcement. Yeah. But in Yellowknife, the announcements on dual-use runways, the port facility, land corridors that will actually create the first ever highway through the Northwest Territories and into Nunavut, that's what our partners are looking for. So these projects are, as I understand, shovel ready, and what they will be looking for is like, okay, are we getting on with them and actually doing now what we've announced?
Well, that leads me to my other question, because we've seen announcements, but for example, the projects announced yesterday to be forwarded to the major projects office is being forwarded to the MPO. It's not necessarily the actual announcement of the start of a project. What kind of speed do the Allies expect of Canada or are hoping to see out of Canada?
So I think, first and foremost, our allies expect certain things of us. I think the Canadian public expects even more of the government. And the projects that were announced yesterday, my understanding is that nothing goes to the major projects office unless it is ready to move. I mean, when I say shovel ready, there have been plans in place to build these gravel highways, to get things underway. Our allies are looking to see, okay, are we actually doing what we say we're doing? They're also having issues with establishing, their own infrastructure projects. They're also having issues with restarting their own defense industrial base. So I think they are sympathetic to how complicated some of these questions are. But they're really looking to Canada to deliver the capabilities that we commit to NATO, and they are looking to Canada to continue to be, frankly, a good ally and partner, which is not what we're seeing, unfortunately, at the moment from the United States.
Mm-hmm. And to that, as I said, the Prime Minister will be meeting with the Nordic leaders later this weekend, then on his way to the UK to meet the British Prime Minister as well as the King. RJ Simpson's actually going to come up after you, so we're going to ask him about how shovel-ready those projects actually are.
It'll be interesting to hear.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to hear. But before you and I are done, I do want to get, given your experience, I want to get your reaction to what we heard today from the U.S. White House. The fact that they're going to lift sanctions off of Russia to allow Russian oil back into the marketplace, a direct result to the oil shortage that has now been caused by the conflict in Iran. I want you to take a listen right now to what the Prime Minister had to say about the lifting of these sanctions earlier today while he was in Norway.
Okay, thank you.
Canada's position is to maintain sanctions on Russia, maintain sanctions including on the Shadow Fleet, which is moving this oil. There has been very tight cooperation between Russia and Iran at great cost to the people of Ukraine and a great threat to peace and security in Europe. And this group, under the leadership of the two gentlemen to my right, and a broader coalition of the willing, has stood up to that.
And really, that shows the interconnectivity of this world. Here we have a conflict in Iran, the United States and Israel striking Iran a couple of weeks ago. That leads to Russian sanctions being lifted on oil. The trade of Russian oil sends money to the Kremlin. That helps fund the Kremlin's war against Ukraine. I'm wondering what your reaction is to this move on behalf of the United States, what you think it might actually do to global security.
I find it astonishing. And it, to me, is an illustration of how poorly thought through this current attack on Iran is, and the fact that in rushing to bomb Iran, the United States in particular doesn't seem to have thought through the second and third and fourth order effects. And in particular, the impact on the Straits of Hormuz, the impact on getting petroleum products to market. It's not just oil, it's also fertilizer inputs, of which a significant proportion comes out of the Gulf. It is tactical decisions on the part of the White House that are having long-term strategic effect. And it is criminal, in my view. I gather the lifting of the sanctions is supposed to be time-bound, 30 days. It's supposed to be explicit to those ships that are already at sea, many of which were being searched for and stopped because they are part of Russia's shadow fleet. But the idea that we are allowing more revenue into the Russian market that will contribute to war aims, that even the United States is providing support for Ukraine. They are working directly against their own interests as well as clearly against the interests of the people of Ukraine.
Well, we are watching the situation as this conflict goes on. As you say, we're watching these, I guess, unexpected complications as a result. But for now, Wendy Gilmour, thank you very much for the time.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Well, as we noted earlier, before the Prime Minister left for Norway, he did make a major announcement in Yellowknife, a $35 billion security investment to build and improve defense capacity in the north, and signaling support for major infrastructure projects to support those operations. Take a listen now to what we heard from Mark Carney yesterday in Yellowknife.
We are taking control of our future. We will no longer rely on others to defend our Arctic security or to fuel our economy. We're taking full responsibility for defending our sovereignty.
And to secure that sovereignty, these are the projects that the Prime Minister says he will refer to the Major Projects Office: building the Mackenzie Valley Highway, creating a road to a new deep-water port and airfield at Grays Bay in Nunavut, creating an Arctic economic and security corridor, plus supporting an expansion to the Tolston Hydro Project in the Northwest Territories. And to talk about all of this is the Premier of the Northwest Territories, RJ Simpson. Premier, good to see you. Thank you for the time.
Oh, my pleasure. It's great to be here.
So the Mackenzie Valley Highway, the Tolston Hydro expansion, those will directly affect your territory. Perhaps we can talk about the benefit here. How will this actually benefit your community, your territory, and the people in it?
Yeah, and there's actually three projects. So there's also the Arctic Economic Security Corridor. But we'll start with the Mackenzie Valley Highway, which is in the western part of the territory. And this is a highway that has been talked about since the late 1950s. Prime Minister Diefenbaker was, I believe, the first prime minister to raise this and try to advance it. And what that will do is connect the southern part of the territory to the northern part of the territory. Right now, we have about a 800-kilometer gap. So you can't actually drive from the northern part to the southern part. You have to go through the Yukon, through BC, and back up into the territory. So this is going to connect a number of communities, which right now are fly-in only, or they have a winter road and they're serviced by barges. So this is going to lower the costs of goods and services in those communities, connect families, connect communities, and connect Canadians, and provide opportunities for tourism and resource development. So this is something that the people of the territory have been asking for generations. There's been decades of lobbying, and finally we are at this moment where we have a federal government looking to support us. And so that's exciting. In the eastern part of the territory, there's two projects. There's a Tolston Hydro expansion and the Arctic Economic and Security Corridor. And this is another road project, the Security Corridor. It would be a road through the very mineral-rich Slave Geological Province, and then it would connect into Nunavut, which would then go to the Grays Bay port. The Tolston Hydro project is to connect we have two hydro grids, which are not connected to each other, nor the Canadian grid, but it would connect those two together and then provide an opportunity to send power up that Arctic Economic and Security Corridor to help with resource development and exploration in the region. So these are going to not just connect families and communities, but they are going to create economic opportunities for generations to come, not just for people of the territory, but for people of Canada.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Economic opportunities, and it also goes to hear from the Prime Minister, securing Canadian sovereignty in the north. We've heard the Prime Minister's take on that. What would you say about that potential with these projects?
I would have to agree. The Mackenzie Valley Highway is going to connect the forward operating location, and the Northern Operational Support Hub that's in Nunavut right now. That is north of the Arctic Circle. Right now, there's not reliable all-season transportation to get there. If you want to drive there, you have to go over the mountains into the Yukon and then back over the mountains again. And there's that mountain pass is often closed because of whiteout conditions. So going up the Mackenzie Valley, we're actually going to be able to, the military will be able to convoy from the bases in the south up to their Arctic forward operating location. So I think that's a very clear example of how it's going to support our defense and sovereignty. And then the other road in the eastern part of the territory is going to help open up an area for the development of critical minerals, which are very important to sovereignty now. And we see that there's countries that control the vast majority of the production, the processing of these critical minerals, and there's other countries that control most of the actual raw materials. And so this is going to be this will allow Canada to access those materials, those resources, and ensure that we have a secure supply chain for us and for our allies.
Yeah, so secure supply chain, and really when you outline the benefits of it, you're talking about civilian benefit, industrial benefit, military benefit. You know, I'm going to add another one to it, because you and I have talked when the premiers have gotten together on the side, and you've also noted the fact that there's also a fourth purpose in this, in that this does also go towards reconciliation.
Yeah, absolutely. These are Indigenous-led projects. So in the territory, the days of plowing projects through against Indigenous opposition are over. We really do commit to free, prior, and informed consent. And so the reason we're able to move these forward is because the Indigenous governments have said, yes, we want to move these forward. And it took a lot of trust building between our government and the Indigenous governments. But we're at that point now where for the one project, the Arctic Economic and Security Corridor, the Indigenous governments are actually the proponents on that one. And we are ensuring that for all of our projects, there will be benefits to the local Indigenous communities in the construction and then long term. So I think this is a shining example for the rest of Canada on reconciliation and how to do things right.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. A shining example, as you say. But you know, what's interesting about all these projects is that they've not yet really received the green light, at least not yet. You know, they're going to be referred to the Major Projects Office. So if they're going to be referred to the MPO first, what kind of timeline are you expecting before we see shovels in the ground with these projects?
Well, for the Mackenzie Valley Highway, there's already parts of it that are permitted. So some bridges, some other resurfacing work that can be done just south of the actual new construction. And so that's the type of work that can happen this summer. And we are coming out of the environmental assessment for the first phase of that highway, the first few hundred kilometers. And so it's realistic to think that we could be really constructing the main part of that highway next year, and at the very latest the following year. So that is imminent, like that's going to happen right away. The other ones are a little further behind in that there's more work to be done. With the Arctic Economic Security Corridor, when I first got elected, one of the chiefs whose traditional territory this will be built on said that the route that we had selected as a public government was basically a non-starter for them. And I said, well, then let's go back to the drawing board. And that's how the Indigenous governments became that proponent. And so we are working on routing options and looking forward. So we're looking at the routing options now and figuring out how we're going to go forward. The Major Projects Office, now that we've been referred there, we are going to get a lot of assistance from them. You know, we're a small territory, we're a small government. We don't have necessarily all the resources and expertise to build these nation-building projects, really. And so the MPO is really going to support us, and I'm hopeful that we can move the timelines forward much more quickly. That said, our regulatory system, it is robust. It's a one project, one review system, and it is based on land claim agreements. They're really codified into that regulatory system. So we're not looking to skip steps or sidestep any environmental regulations, but I can see a bunch of spots where we can shave a month or two off here and there. And by doing that, we're really going to be able to tighten those timelines up and get things moving very quickly.
Well, I know that you've been advocating for this project since you and I met well over a year ago. So to you, congratulations on the announcement yesterday, and for this evening, thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Well, Norway and defense investments are how the Prime Minister ended this week. But as it began, there were big questions about Mark Carney's support for U.S. military action in Iran. The Prime Minister did make a public statement supportive of the strikes just hours after they began, but he amended his position more than once in the days that followed. Now, Mark Carney did not attend the Take Note debate on the war this past Monday, and by Wednesday, Prime Minister was talking more about gaining another floor crosser than he was Iran. So is the controversy around Mark Carney's earlier statement of support now over? I asked the Ottawa Bureau Chiefs to share their thoughts.
Well, look, I understood, the spin I've got from the Carney people is that he came out very forcefully in support of the U.S.-Israeli action. Partly was that he was on a plane and he was going to Australia, and the Australians had already put out a very strong statement. He didn't want to be offside, but quickly realized that this is not going to fly with the Liberal caucus. It's not going to fly with Canadians. I mean, one of the proudest moments in this country is when Jean Chrétien said no to the war in Iraq. So he pulled back, readjusted his position, and frankly, even when he was talking about, if you read carefully what he said about, we can't rule out military action. It made perfect sense. He shouldn't have gotten involved in it because he shouldn't speak about hypotheticals. But he was simply saying that we can't rule out anything if our other countries that we are supportive need Canadian military help. Maybe we'd have to do this. But he clearly said, I do not want to. Canadians are not going to support this war with Israel and the United States.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Tonda, is the issue over?
No, because it's one of the first big foreign policy blunders he's made, and it was a misstep last week, and it misgauged Canadian public opinion. We, in a story today, just on the whole lifting of the U.S. lifting of Russian sanctions on oil, Carney and the other two leaders he was standing with, Germany and Norway, say they oppose that, but also I think that the government must have been seeing the same polling that we've seen this week, which is that Canadians do not want unqualified support for the U.S. They very much want de-escalation. They view this as a major threat, a spreading war in that region. And I think Carney very quickly realized that. So his recalibration was not just, I was on a plane and I wasn't paying attention. It was very much, I think, once he hit the ground, you had, party statesmen coming out, opposition, his own MPs, his caucus. It's not just the NDP that are a bunch of peaceniks. A lot of Canadians are a bunch of peaceniks. So he had to adjust. I think there was political imperative there, and to his credit, he did. Yeah,
I would also say that this is the first international faux pas on the part of Mr. Carney. He's gained a stature internationally because he's seen as the leader of the middle powers. And after the speech from Davos, this was not fitting with the kind of a position that he wanted to put Canada in. So that was a bit contradiction between what he said in Davos and what the very quick endorsement of what the United States and Israel are doing in Iran. Now, the consequences of this, I think, was I think he realized that he needed to correct his statements because he knew that there was some political damage done in his own party within Canada. When you see people like Lloyd Axworthy coming out of and swinging at the Prime Minister the way he did, that's a clear sign, a clear warning that this was a misstep on the part of
part of the problem I see with this government is that they're run by technocrats. You've got Michael Sabia, who's an accomplished business person, but he's not great on politics. And Marc-André Blanchard, who's a corporate lawyer, and was with the CAS again. I know he's overseen election campaigns, but he's not a political animal. And in the Prime Minister's office, those are basically the three decision makers. You have Tom Pitfield, who's good at data stuff, but I don't think everybody's ever said Tom's got that political mind.
Like Jean Chrétien, for example.
Like Jean Chrétien or Jerry Butts, or, he doesn't have anybody who are with him on that trip that could say, don't do this, because this will go badly with the Liberal Party and likely not to go very well with Canadians as well.
Or arguably people who were on that trip who may have said so, but he didn't listen to.
Or didn't listen to them. That's possible too.
And that was Robert Fife, Tonda MacCharles, and Joël-Denis Bellavance, part of this week's episode of The Bureau Chiefs with Michael Serapio, a PrimeTime Politics podcast. A new episode is out right now, and you can listen anywhere you get your podcasts. You can also watch it on the CPAC YouTube channel. Well, picking up on Iran, I did ask the 5 people running to be the next leader of the federal NDP to comment on the Prime Minister's statement. Here is what they had to say.
We've seen what the U.S. administration did in Venezuela. We see what's happening in Gaza, and we see what's happening with Russia invading Ukraine. It's when the powerful decide that they can invade and take over the weak, and that's a problem. Because if we don't stand up to that as a nation, if we don't stand up and truly stand up for international law, we're just sitting, going along for the ride and being okay with it.
You expect more from our prime minister, especially in these moments. Canadians don't want to see their prime minister cheering on like a Trump-Netanyahu war in Iran. That's not who we are as Canadians. It's not the culture we carry. And we should be expecting more from our prime minister.
The regime in Iran can be as evil as you think it is, but it is not for foreign assassinations and airstrikes to change the balance of forces in Iran. The people of Iran were massacred in the thousands, maybe tens of thousands, in the last wave of protests and standing up. That's what we should be supporting, not regime change from the outside. It has never ended well, and Canadians don't believe in that path.
What we are seeing right now in the Middle East, this escalation, was inevitable. That was an inevitable response to Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu's attack. And they will be fine. But the innocent people who live in that region will not. You know, we are already seeing massive casualties with civilians, the destruction of infrastructure, the escalation of violence. You know, other countries are being pulled into this conflict. I expected more from our Prime Minister.
And if Prime Minister Carney is going to say some good things at Davos, then the last thing he should be doing is giving sort of reluctant agreement to the destruction of that international order that says you don't attack other countries just because you decide, and on the pretext that they've got weapons of mass destruction. We've seen this game played before.
And that was Rob Ashton, Tenniel Johnston, Avi Lewis, Heather McPherson, and Tony McQuail at the end. The 5 people running to be the next leader of the federal New Democrats. You can hear more about their platforms this weekend on a new episode of Profile, in which you'll hear highlights from feature interviews I conducted with each of those leadership hopefuls. You can watch Profile here on CPAC, cpac.ca, and on our YouTube channel. And as for Primetime Politics, that is our program for this Friday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. We will see you on the next episode of Primetime Politics. Until then, take care.